Hi, thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. And what I want to cover and talk obviously about the book, the Brilliant Essays book, but I really want to tailor this so that it deals with your issues. I'm very keen that what you get at the end of this is some sense of being empowered for you to go forward and for each of you to achieve your full potential. So do please take part in the polls and do please take part in the Q&As so that we can shape this to make it really helpful for you. Okay, so looking at this Brilliant Essays book.
Sorry, Paul, can I?
Yeah, sorry, have I actually started before?
Yeah, no, I'm just going to quickly do a quick housekeeping for everyone that's joining in now, because as
Okay.
let's go up, if you don't mind quickly.
Yeah, sure. We can start right over.
Lovely. So yeah, I think we've got a few people coming in, so I'll just quickly do a
Please.
run over the rules. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this academic year's last installment of the Boost Your Skills webinar series, where we enlist the advice of specialist experts in order to help you make the most out of your university experience and to acquire the skills to help you succeed and develop on both a professional and personal level. My name is Siddharth. Joining me is Jenny, and we are your Boost Your Skills team. This event is in webinar format, so you will not be able to turn on your cameras and mics, but we will still love to hear from you through the chat function. This is a safe space with no judgments being passed, so please feel free to ask questions without fear or worry. If you are still anxious, feel free to message us anonymously and we will pass it on. The event will consist of a presentation followed by some time at the end for Q&A. The event is also being live streamed to our YouTube channel, so don't worry if you've missed something. We'll be sharing a link to the video and the slides after the event. A big thank you to all our attendees who have pre-submitted questions. We host live webinars regularly, and if you'd like to stay updated, follow our Instagram page at Boost Your Skills and keep an eye on the events tab on your engagement portal. Paul Dickerson is Associate Professor at the University of Roehampton, where he has taught for over 25 years. His research has predominantly adopted a qualitative approach and is largely focused on issues of talk and interaction. Paul's Social Psychology, Traditional and Critical Perspectives second edition is to be published by Sage in March 2024. And today's webinar, he will draw from his best-selling book, How to Write Brilliant Psychology Essays, which he wrote with a very specific purpose, to empower you to reach your full potential. This book and the ideas within it have helped many students by vividly showing not just what you need to do to write brilliant essays, but how to do it. Right now, Paul is going to show you how you have the potential to write brilliant essays and help you to achieve just that. So without any further delay, here's Paul.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a beautiful introduction. Thank you to both Siddharth and Jenny and for putting on this event. This is amazing. And I think there's some very important words that were shared there. And one of them is the idea of being non-judgmental. So there will be Q&A opportunities, obviously, and you can put comments in the chat and so on. And I think it's important to be able to do that so that we can shape what we're doing here today to really help you. And the other idea that very much connects to the reason I wrote the book is about showing you how to do it. There are a number of positive reviews that one of them's kind of been picked out here, but I'll leave you to form your own judgments on that. My main purpose here today is to find ways of really helping you. If I do that, I'll feel it's a job well done. Okay, so a broad menu, if you like, for today's session. I want to identify some of the crucial skills for brilliant essays. I want to address 8 important skills. And I want to give you a sense of how you can improve your essays and other coursework and exams as well. And in particular, I want to really address your questions. So if I can empower you, then that'll be fantastic. So it was written, as Siddharth excellently outlined, this book was written from this sense of a dilemma that many students face. And I think that is that students know what to do. I think we make that clear. I think almost every time you get feedback, you're going to get some sense of what you need to do, but not always how to do it. Actually, I've had a long-standing interest in creative writing. And part of the reason that I was very keen to write this book was that I noticed that if I wanted to do creative writing, there were countless books, and some of them were absolutely superb on how to do good creative writing. But I found from my perusal of books in terms of academic writing that many were for my particular perspective, they seemed quite general, and they didn't always unpack exactly how to do the things that we're always asking our students to do: how to be critically evaluative, how to have a smooth, interconnected essay, how to have an effective conclusion. These things are actually hard if you're not shown how. And so that's what the book is really about. I tried to draw on lots of examples that show stronger and weaker writing, and also how to transform weaker writing into stronger writing. I'll also show you actually how to do it the other way around, just so you're really clear about what are the components of the writing that are making it do the critical evaluation, the smooth interconnection, and the effective conceptual conclusion. So that's enough about the general scope of the book. What I want to ask you, though, so that I can be tackling things that are relevant for you, I've just got a quick question for the chat, and I want to ask, what is it that you're supposed to do in, let's say, most essays? What are the sorts of things that you really need to do, that you think you should be doing in most essays? And I just would be interested to hear. I've got my pen ready, and I want to note down some of the things that are coming up. I am actually hoping that it matches what I was planning to say. If not, there's going to be a lot of ad-libbing, and it might make it a very interesting watch, actually.
I think the first one so far is critical evaluation.
Oh, that's a good one.
And there's another one now, support with research.
Yeah.
So, answering the question. Oh, 2 people have said that you should be answering the question.
That's really good. Okay, so these are really great points, and I have got a note of those. And as we go through, I'm going to keep those in mind and keep coming back to those. We might look at a few other things as well. So I want to look at some of these ideas that have been raised about critical evaluation, support in terms of the research. I think that's excellent as well. And answering the question. Those are really key things. And I think just in terms of the critical evaluation, answering questions, sorts of things we put in our feedback a lot of the time, and I'm sure you've had them in feedback. And the support in terms of research, I think that can often be a dilemma for a student starting with an essay or other assignment title, and also in developing it before submission. That can often be a factor to know what are the best ways. Not that there's no information out there, it's more the how do we sift through all of the myriad of information that we come across. Okay, so I'm going to, I've got a little poll. I will add your items in that are not represented in this poll. Oh, look at that. So there's poll popping up. And I just want to know from this list of eight factors, I'd really like to know what are the things that you're very interested in. I see that critical evaluation is off to an early lead. Oh, hold on. It may be an unassailable lead. I'm not sure. Okay, a few things are coming in. I don't know what. I always like watching polls.
To add as well, we can't see who's voted for what. So
yeah, please. There's no, and yeah, this comes back to the non-judgmental thing. There really isn't a right-wrong answer here, and I can see that I certainly do want to talk about answering the question, which I do address in the book as well, and supporting the research. Which I've kind of covered under resources, actually, which sounds a little bit more obscure. I was trying to find a very succinct way so that the titles weren't getting too long there. Okay, so what I'm seeing here is that critical evaluation seems to be particularly a sort of favorite point to address. There's more general stuff about writing. I'm keeping answering the question in mind, and supportive research, that's the resources, although that hasn't kind of been ticked here. I think that's the way I worded it. I'm going to keep that in mind as well. All these things are really important, I think, and others as well. I just try to make it quite finite. So let me just, I wonder if I could run through some of these and just start to have a look. Okay, so looking at these results, these are some of the features that you will get in feedback from your assignments. I'm sure you have already, that you've received things saying, and I think I'm not surprised that critical evaluation actually is out there as a front runner. Many of us, running online sessions today, Many of us talk about the importance of critical evaluation, and our students are very keen to get good at critical evaluation. And yet often the feedback that they get, or that you get, is that this is needed, but there can be a lack of clarity. And sometimes, you know, to be honest, a lack of time in the communication of what that involves and how to get good at that. So let's try and unpack this and a few other things as well. Okay, so 8 academic skills. I can see I should expand that a little bit, but I do, without wanting to overplug the book, I would just say you can actually, I've got a QR code at the end of me talking through about each chapter, so you can use that as well. I think there may be a discount code available at some point that Siddharth and Jenny are in charge of. But have a little look and a think, because I think we can tackle most of these questions. I think they're really important, and I just want to go so that it's no longer the case that these are things on the page or digitally telling you that you need to do, but instead they are things that give you a plan and a strategy for tackling them. Okay, so let's start with introductions. This didn't particularly score highly, although I think it is often an important factor. Let's have a little look. I just want to very quickly unpack what I think are the raw ingredients of a really good introduction. And for me, I tend to split it into 2. I tend to think that there's something that I would call an orientating sentence or sentences, depending on the length of the assignment you're writing, where you want to address the title and you want to give a sense of the relevance, the extent to which it's being debated, the importance, how this is either a very much researched or maybe even a neglected topic, but one that somehow is worthy of attention. I think that's the important thing. So that's the kind of orientating sentence. We've read hundreds of them. I'm sure you have. And then I think following that, you want some sort of outline, often called a statement of intent. Let's have a little look with an example. Critically discuss social identity theory research into riots. That would be a title. This would be a reasonable orientating sentence. Riots have attracted interest within social psychology ever since Le Bon's 1896 controversial work concerning crowds. Now, that doesn't mean that if you had this as a title, that is the right sentence to use, but that's just trying to illustrate what I mean when I talk about an orientating sentence. It's a sentence that sets up the topic as being worthy of consideration. Okay, and then a statement of intent. This should be the way in which you outline how your assignment, say your essay, will approach the question. I'm not going to read all of this, but just if you look at the bold bits, this essay will focus on a different approach because we had Le Bon early on. And I put social identity theory, particular attention will be given to, and then I go into Riker's work and so on. Some attention being given to criticisms and developments of this approach, and then I detail some of those. So the bits in bold are important here because they give you a sense as to how you are conveying to the reader the idea of what's coming up. I often think with academic writing, it's a little bit different to some of the other writing we might enjoy. You might like suspense, you might like thrillers, you might like detective fiction. In a way, academic writing, the reader wants something a little bit more where they know what's happening. So don't go for the plot twist, partway through your assignment. That usually doesn't work great for save that for your creative writing on the side, which would be brilliant. But for the academic writing, I think the plot twist isn't so welcome generally, unless in your specific essay guidance. I should say that all that I say today is pitched at what is generally the case, and specific essay guidance that you get might take you in a different direction. I haven't come across one in many, many years in which we are seeking a suspense, sudden reveal at the end that this is the best theory after all, or whatever. Usually we don't want that sort of thing. So we want it a little bit more. You take the reader with you in the academic world of writing. And the readers are really looking for reassurance and clarity and precision. And so I think what we want to do is tell them where we're going. Okay, don't leave them guessing. I have seen essays where we've been kept guessing or whatever. I did see one essay many years ago, which was a poem, and I thought that was excellent creativity, but it's not, again, not quite them being matched and fitted to the academic essay purpose. It is let's be honest, it's not all of writing is not academia. It is a really small percentage of writing. So the introductions do something that you don't get in a lot of other type of writing. It tells the reader, it reassures them about what's coming up, sometimes gives a sense of the rationale for why that's coming up. And the nice thing is, if you think we had critical evaluation, I've got it in my notes here, critical evaluation. If we think that that's important, your intro, believe it or not, is the first point at which you can communicate that you're actually being evaluative, that you are being critically evaluative. Do you notice here it says attention being given to criticisms and developments of this approach? The reader is going to be in a really lovely mood if they read this. They're going to think, oh, wow, look at this. It's covering the key work, and it's going to even look at criticisms. Wow. And that's going to put them in a really buoyant, happy mood. And that's how we want our readers to be. So this is, and if we think about structure, I don't think you specifically mentioned structure, but if you think about the importance of interconnected structure, your essay needs to be properly organized, avoid being a list. The first point at which we communicate that this essay is well structured is in the introduction as well. This statement of intent does so much. It tells the reader what we did have coming up is answering the question. As I say, I promise you I deal with that in the book. Answering the question is key. The first point at which you very clearly communicate whether you're answering the question or not, the impression that's formed when you're reading an essay or other assignment, the impression about have they answered the question, that is very much informed by what's going on in the introduction. So this is where you want to say, look, I am on the same page as you, dear reader. I am answering the question. It is organized in a coherent and sensible way. And what's more, there's going to be critical evaluation. All of that's going on. What an important paragraph the introduction is. So let's not neglect that. Okay, so we did have another question about supporting research. I think that's a brilliant question, and it shows just the right sort of intellectual ambition. So what I wanted to do, I mentioned essay guides, and that's going to come up here as well. And this varies a lot across different unis, different institutions. Let's have a little look. What resources am I highlighting here? I've got the lecture or lectures. That would include any talk session, any contact time, seminars, and so on, and seminar notes. I've got essay guides. Here I'm thinking not so much books on writing essays, but I'm thinking specific to the module. Essay guides, what's required, what should you be referring to, what literature should you be using, what resources should you be using, and then the reading list. So you might have a reading list. For example, we use Tallis, that's quite a widely used one. You might use something else, but these are the kind of reading lists that are provided for students. And then I've got wider resources. So this is kind of branching out, maybe using other databases like PsycInfo, PsycArticles, Web of Science, and so on. Let's have a little look in more detail at these, though. So lecture, what has been referred to in the lecture? I think that's absolutely key. We did have, if I can refer back to it again, answering the question as being a kind of key feature of what we want to find out more about. I think sometimes looking at what was covered in the lecture is a really, really smart idea. Quite a number of people I know of all different ages have had the experience of being taught the wrong syllabus when, for example, at A-level or whatever. And one of the good things I think about university is that that's much less likely to happen, because usually the people who set the curriculum and shape the teaching and deliver the teaching and write the essay questions or the assignment questions or set the exams and mark or coordinate or moderate the marking are pretty much the same team of people. And so you don't get this mismatch as much as you do, sadly, in some cases, in, you know, a number of times in A-levels, whatever, people have not been taught the correct curriculum and so on. So here, what's been referred to in the lecture is a really good guide, usually, about what you should be looking for in terms of your writing. So I would see that the PowerPoint slides, perhaps the lecture recording, notes, etc. is really important. And then in addition to that, you've got your assignment guide. What do the guidance notes suggest? So, for example, I would normally say that in academic writing, the use of the personal pronoun, I think, I feel, and so on, usually that's not welcome. However, there are some assignments where they are deliberately reflexive pieces, and so that sort of writing is very much welcomed and is kind of important. So do look at what the specific guidance for the essay says, and that will help you in terms of resourcing and in terms of style. It will help you with resourcing because that will probably tell you the sorts of key theories, the sorts of key research that you should be drawing on in addressing this essay title. And then reading list. What are the items identified in the reading list? And I want to pick this out specifically because I think a lot of the time what we try and do with reading lists is to annotate them. The practice there will vary quite a lot across universities, across individual modules, individual lecturers, and so on. But often what you get there is a kind of curated list of reading. Normally, reading lists would be informed by what's available in terms of library and online resources. And so that's quite useful. That's not going and searching for stuff that you can't access. That's stuff that normally, the majority of that at any rate, should be accessible. And usually that will be relevant too, because it's developed by the people who are delivering and involved in the marking of your assignments, then that's usually highly relevant. So what I'm talking about here is an organic growing out from what's already proximal to the essay title. The very people or team of people involved in the lecture and writing the essay guide and a reading list are probably aligned with those who are setting the assignment title and marking the assignment title. Might not be the exact same person all the while, but it's likely to be a coherent team of people. And so I wouldn't underestimate that. So the organic growth outwards, if you think of it kind of spreading from the little seed growing outwards and outwards, I think it starts with the first point at which the ideas are introduced, whether that's a lecture, seminar, or whatever, some sort of talk session and the guidance, then growing out to the reading list, and then wider resources, what you can search for and how you can do this. And I think here, it does depend on your university. What are the, Psych Articles, Web of Science, PsycInfo, all of these are wonderful databases. I'm going to, just because I know that everyone will have access to this, and you might find that at your university, you can link it to your library, check with the people in your library about how to do that. And you might find that if you join it, if you log on through your university Wi-Fi, you might find that the Web of Science option pops up here as well. So I think Google Scholar, it's not great because it's not a closely curated database, unlike PsycInfo, Psych Articles, and so on. But it has some scope and some possibility. And I just want to open those up briefly, if I may, because you can apply these across to whatever databases you have at your university as well. So if, for example, what I tend to do, if you're doing a search term, I would try and bring a criticality into that search term in a lot of your searches. So in terms of getting resources, that was the question that I was wanting to answer here, supporting research and research into your assignment writing. In terms of this, I thought one of the things that's important here is to bring up, here I've talked about groupthink, which you may or may not be aware of. I'm not going to give you a lecture on it now, which stay on at the end if you're really keen, and I'll see what I can do. But for now, let's just say that these are two different ways of thinking about group decision-making and the issues that arise. And so rather than search for polythink and then search for groupthink, just if you're putting a V or verses or something, you get some more critical stuff coming up. And here I did this example because if you search for something, you might find that you hit a paywall. That's one of the problems. If you've got Google Scholar linked to university library, you'll find which ones are accessible through your library, and that can be helpful. But say you search something and you hit a paywall, and depending on the guidance you received and the context and so on, you might not feel it's appropriate to spend $60 to view this for 24 hours or something. So what you can do is kind of look at who cited this work or what are the related articles. I've got a little arrow down. So what I did here in this example, I got quite a few returns. I saw this, thought, oh, that looks interesting. Saw there was a paywall, then went cited by, and I found another article. In this case, I think it was a book that I wound up with. Google Books, all well and good, I'm sure, but you tend to get a very, very, a few pages you can read, and then, frustratingly, this maybe is like reading half of a detective novel or so. You're just getting interested, and then the rest of the book's missing. So what I did there, I found that the author had written other things, and there was this paper that seems to have been written concurrently with the book, and that was very useful and very succinct. So do use this if you're using this. And you can use very similar things with other databases. You might want to use cited by or related articles, and that can sometimes get you on in terms of your research. But I do think the important point here is start very close and proximal to this specific essay and then grow outwards from that. I think that's kind of probably the best plan. I've mentioned a little bit about writing. And I think that there are different elements of the writing question that people tend to be interested in. So let's just have a quick look at a few of these. There might be questions, for example, around grammar. Sometimes that is an issue. Here, again, it does depend a little bit on the rules in your university and the permitted tools as well as the available tools. So, for example, Roehampton, we use Studiosity, and we find that's a very, very good tool. A slight snag that sometimes comes is, although it's a very fast turnaround tool, occasionally you'll get advice from tools that help with grammar and language expression. There might be advice that goes a little bit against what you've been told for the assignment. I've just seen that a few times. I've sometimes seen, for example, some of these tools suggesting that why don't you have subheadings all the way through? Sometimes that's just what you want for an assignment, and sometimes that's not what's wanted for the assignment. And there, I say that the trump card all the while has to be the specific essay guidance or the specific assignment guidance that you're getting through your module, okay? So if you're not sure and you're getting contradictory advice, the people marking it are giving you the assignment guidance. That probably has got to be treated as the priority, okay? So anyway, I think seeing what are the permitted and available tools, that can be, with that caveat, that don't let it contradict what you're being told. I think that that's really can be very useful. In terms of, moving on. In terms of referencing, I don't know what tools you might have available. There's likely to be quite a few. It might be Cite Them Right or something similar. There might be library-based resources and so on. And if permitted, but I think permissions might vary a little bit on this, there are Scribr, MyBib, etc., various citation generators, but I would check that your university is happy with them being used. I wouldn't want you to use something just because this guy in a beard told you there was a good idea. I think do check the university. That's not a dig at people with beards, by the way. Do check the university details on that. I think that's quite important. And then there's this other thing that I think people often have in mind when they talk about writing, and I think that's really about developing an appropriate academic style. This comes back to what I was saying earlier. If you think of all these different genres of writing, you wouldn't want to write, I suppose you do get fusions, don't you? But if you're writing a science fiction or a detective or a romantic novel or fantasy novel, of course you get fusions. But if you try and blend everything in, it's going to be a little bit of a mess. So we're aware of the fact that when we're choosing fiction to read or whatever, we often have a sense of the genre and we respect that. And in a way, as I was saying earlier, the academic writing is a type. It's a particular style of writing. If you're asked to write a reflective piece, that's, again, a particular style of writing. So I think it's about getting a feel for that. Then it's keeping that style. It's not about, I can't write, or my writing is wrong, my writing is not good enough. I wouldn't get into that negative discourse. I think there's a lot to be said. So the word right at the start, the word that really struck me that was used was about non-judgmental. Siddharth said about it's non-judgmental. Feel free to dive into the chat. It's non-judgmental, and that's absolutely true. And I think sometimes we're a bit too judgmental on ourselves and our writing. So a thought that comes to mind here is, if you think a lot of people who are marking your essays and your other assignments and your exams have written lots and lots of words of psychology. So it might be perhaps between, I'm just kind of doing this in my head, between, I would estimate, 125,000 words of psychology that have been published or that have been submitted for an assessment. And it might go up to about 1 million or so words of psychology. So it varies. I was kind of trying to reflect on how many words of psychology I've written myself over the many, many years. And it's just loads, really. And so if someone who's written lots of psychology finds it easy to be, or easier than you to be, critically evaluative, then, you know, do not be hard on yourself. That's like someone who's trained as a concert pianist for 20 odd years, you know, being able to play better than you, and you've been trying it out for a few months or something. Well, yeah, you know, big deal. So I think that the point I'm trying to make from this is, you can learn from that expertise, yes, but don't be harsh on yourself. The more you write, the smoother it is, and the more natural it feels to be critically evaluative. And I think sometimes as well, I think that might, and this is kind of trying to be reflective as someone leaving comments, sometimes it's easy to underappreciate that critical evaluation can feel, just to come back to that key point, can feel quite unusual if you haven't done it year after year after year, if you haven't been exposed to it. And it's no wonder that it feels more natural for the people commenting than it might do for you receiving it. And it, for some of us, it's so long since we're an undergraduate, you're struggling to remember what it was like. One of the good things and appropriately humbling things I have is that I've still got some of my undergraduate essays, and oh my gosh, what on earth is going on there, you know? So I think in a way, all academics should be keeping their undergraduate essays. So we keep that sense when we're leaving feedback, we keep that sense that, look, you know, we've struggled with this as well. You know, it's not just we're clever and we've sorted it all. Yeah, we've had many, many years. It's like someone, as I say, who's trained in the piano for years. So what if it's a bit smoother than someone who's just been doing it a few weeks or a few months, you know? So don't be hard on yourself, allow yourself time. And I think the skill of academic writing is to think, and I'm going to come back to this point, is to think, where are you taking your reader? I think that's the real thing. Sorry, it's a book has just fallen off the desk. Incidentally, it's probably going to be backwards there on your screen. It is that book. Sorry, shameless plug. But it fell off its own accord, unless there's something supernatural going on. Perhaps, I don't know. Okay, so 8 academic skills writing. I think you should try to read your own writing. Sometimes you don't feel like it. I guess. I think sometimes it can be such a painful process. You just want to get rid of it, and you don't want to have to read it through again. And I do currently know the pain of reading through what you've written. I've got quite a lot of proofs to get through, and it really is painful. It's kind of embarrassing as well. I kind of think we should maybe, you know, with books and things, we should publish an edition before the proofreading stage and an edition after the proofreading stage, and it could really be reassuring, because I think you often see the smooth words on the page after it's been through quite a process. And I think it would really encourage you if you saw that. And I would just want to say, you know, please don't be disheartened. We all need to read through our own writing. Read other academic writing. You might find that there are favorite textbooks that you get where you really like where the author's coming from or whatever. You know, as an undergraduate, I really liked Roger Brand's textbooks. And I think he had an ability, I thought his writing felt like you were in the room with him and he was telling you these interesting anecdotes and whatever. That might be terrible for some. So read the one that you like best. Some people like it really pared down and to the point and no messing about, and that works well for them. And be prepared to redraft. I was talking to some of my students the other week, and I was really interested. And I thought I was being really clever at this. I was going to present this notion that you should write checklists of your work before you submit it. I thought, oh, they won't have thought of that. Almost everyone had, of course. So, and I thought that was brilliant. And a lot of them were having checklists of their work that were informed by feedback they'd had before. So they thought, I'm aware that this is an issue. So I've now, before I submit something, I'm going to read it through and check whether I have done something that looks like critical evaluation. I'm going to check whether I have done this APA 7 referencing. I'm going to check whether I have got an appropriate conclusion. And I think that's brilliant, really. So I would recommend that. That's what you're doing there is if you've already had feedback, you're using that feedback and you're kind of fast tracking in a way, rather than waiting for the process of feedback where the academic is telling you what you should have done. It's trying to anticipate that in some way and say, these issues might come up. I'm going to check through for them before. I think that would be really brilliant. I think you'll find that very helpful if you do that. I'm sure many of you do it already. Okay, so interconnection is the thing that I want to just have a quick look at now. By the way, if you're kind of bursting to raise a point, I do have a little point where I'm going to stop for Q&As in a moment, and so do please feel free to put in any thoughts, reflections, comments, or whatever you have. Again, it is non-judgmental. There's not really a right or wrong dimension to this. It's just about tailoring it so that it's helpful for you. Interconnection didn't come up specifically as a kind of winning point, but I think it is quite crucial, and you might get it coming up using lots of different words. Try to avoid listing in your essay is one way. Shopping list, this used to be a very common in essays. Try to avoid a shopping list. Try to connect your points, try to make your essay more smooth, try and develop a coherent argument. All of these are getting at the same thing, and I'm calling it interconnection. And I think it's useful to bear in mind the different ways in which you can do this. Now, one of them we've already touched on, because we mentioned, didn't we, about introductions. And with introductions, I think there you can show the coherence. You can talk about, first going to cover this, then and we looked at that. So that's a really good place to get it going. But there's another bit into the body of your assignment, let's say essay for the sake of argument. And I think there you want to look. And I thought of the 3 C's. I haven't copyrighted this. I mean, maybe I should have, but concurrence, contrast, and complexity. I was very proud of this. The pride is dwindling, I've got to be honest, but at the time I was very, very proud of this. Concurrence is sometimes you can connect ideas because you're going on your paragraph number 3 and 4 might be making the same point. And we'll have a look maybe at an example of that in a second. And there you don't want to just list it and think that the reader will tell it's the same point. You want to find a way in the first sentence of the next paragraph, the new paragraph, you want to link it to what you've done before. That's a really good way of doing this connection. Contrast, sometimes you're bringing in an opposing point of view. I think this is probably the easiest one to do. In contrast to so-and-so, someone else argued differently. And maybe the most difficult one, but with academic writing, if it's more difficult, like this is, and like writing conclusions are, more marks are at stake. So there is a kind of incentive there. If you want to burst through to the higher grades, then I would say don't necessarily avoid it because it's difficult. Try to embrace it. It's not like threshold. It's not kind of saying that this is the bare minimum. It's like saying this is optimal. And so complexity is to try and acknowledge elements of both agreement and disagreement or rethinking of the whole issue. Let's look at some examples because otherwise it can get a little bit obscure. Okay, so I've got something, I think it's, the example here relates to a debate about language acquisition by the looks of it. So let's have a little look here. Bartlett, Auler, Brown and Butler provide further support for Skinner. Okay, so here it's obviously that I've had a previous paragraph dealing with Skinner. I didn't want to put it all on the page because it would be very, very small font size otherwise. So imagine I've had there's an essay about language acquisition and evaluating Skinner's argument. So I've had a pro-Skinner paragraph before, and then I'm introducing a classic bit of research by Bartlett et al. Provide further support for Skinner. Okay, in their study, ... Now, what does this mean? If you get that, the highlighted bit is the important bit. The meaning is that this supports the previous paragraph, which clearly outlined Skinner's approach, or maybe presented some evidence for Skinner. And so this is kind of a way of, this would be the start of the new paragraph, and it's suggesting that this paragraph coming up is going to be another one that supports what you've argued in the previous paragraph. You want to think in terms of your paragraphs quite strategically. And of course, using a very, very famous example here to keep things so we're all on the same page. Chomsky, by contrast, fundamentally opposes Skinner's concept. So no big surprise there. But this is another way that you could start a paragraph. Here it's one of contrast. What does it mean if you start a paragraph like that? It means what's coming up critiques the previous paragraph. Yeah. So what have we got so far? Concurrence, contrast, and complexity. So here, I think we're going to talk about Bruner. Bruner's language acquisition support system incorporates elements that stress the importance of the environment while also retaining an emphasis on an innate dimension. So in other words, what does this mean? This means that the following paragraph supports and critiques Skinner's approach. So don't worry too much about the specific approach that we're looking at. Sorry, I'm just going to go back to here. Don't worry about the specific approach that we're looking at. What I'm saying is that you can have a sentence at the start of your paragraph that shows how it relates to what's gone on before. I think that's really good. A lot of the sense, if you're getting want to get a quick sense, is this interconnected? A lot of that is carried in the first sentences of your new paragraphs, which have to kind of tell the reader, is what is coming up in this paragraph kind of more of the same argument? Is it something contrasting, or is it some sort of more complex relationship between the two? Okay. So we have got time for Q&A, and it would be good to hear some of your thoughts and questions so far.
Well, we've got one in the chat at the moment, which is actually quite an interesting one. So this person's asked, so if you have to write an essay in an exam and cannot use any grammar tools, what would you focus more on, grammar or style?
Okay. Okay, I'm just writing it down so that I'm answering it as fairly and fully as possible. So if I'm in an exam, I've got no grammar tools, and I've got a choice, grammar or style, I think my answer, which might not be exactly what you're hoping for, my answer would really be I'd focus primarily on content and structure. So I would actually focus primarily, so this is about both not having resources that can help you out and having a kind of limited time. So you're kind of low on resources. You're low on the time resource, and you're low on the kind of additional help resource. I think what I would do in an exam, so I'm going to give you the answer as to what I think would help in the exam, and then I'm going to work backwards from that to what you could do before the exam. In the exam itself, I think what I'd do is I'd look at all of the questions that I need to answer. So you're getting that time management thing sorted out. So if it was 3 longish essay type questions and I've got, 2 hours or something, I want to allocate it so that I've got 40 minutes for each, that sort of thing. So in other words, what you need to do, therefore, is to work out how long you have and have that discipline of time, first of all. Then I think what I'd do is I'd look at each of the questions again and try and just do a plan. I'll start with the one that I'm actually going to do, and I'd just do a quick plan. I've got 40 minutes or roughly 40 minutes to tackle this. What is it that the question's about? And I think getting too focused on grammar or style could be a secondary consideration. I think I wouldn't want that to distract me from the main thing. People marking exams might pay attention to style, might pay attention to grammar, but grammar becomes a problem really when it disrupts the meaning, when it disrupts our understanding of what's being conveyed in terms of an exam. So sure, if it's grammatically nice and so on, I'm not saying there aren't some marks that carries. But in terms of being really consequential, I think the grammar is a problem when it stops us from getting a clear sense of the meaning that's being conveyed. And that's where it would be something that you really need to fix. In terms of style, I think the style might be more consequential most of the time than grammar. So unless the grammar is at the critical, meaning disruptive level, then I think probably the style would be more important. So here I'm thinking if someone turned it into a kind of personal experience kind of narrative, then you'd feel that they've slipped out of the overall purpose of the exam question. So I'd say probably style is more important to prioritize, unless the grammar is so troubled that it makes it difficult for the reader to work out the meaning that's being conveyed. So I think that's what I'd keep in mind there. That, but be clear on the time that you've got, 40 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it winds up being. And do try and plan, look carefully, read that question. In an exam condition, it's very hard to read the question carefully because we're all worried about the clock. I would say read the question through 3 times, take your time, just check that you're getting it really clear. Then plan an essay, think of the components that you want and think about the order that you're going to put them in. So you might want to list the components in a little essay plan and then number and swap the numbers around until you've got the order that you want. I'd do it like that. If you really had a choice that I can pay attention to my grammar, I can pay attention to my style, I think I probably would most of the time say that the style, keeping it as an academic essay with an academic focus, is going to be usually more important unless the grammar is so at such a level that it disrupts the ability of the reader to take meaning away from it. Okay, so, and I think the vast majority of the time that is not the case. So usually style, probably more important, but more important still is having a clear structure for the knowledge and control over that resource of time. But I think we should also think here a little bit about what we do before we get into the exam as well. And I think if you know that grammar or style or both are issues for you, I would actually approach your tutors, maybe academics guidance tutors or whatever the structure is in your university. And I would actually raise this. You're very likely to have people who do help with individuals in terms of writing. Often these support services are offered through or allied to library services. And I think that's very, very worthwhile taking up that resource help as well. Fixing your grammar, fixing your style is good to have as a long-term project and quite difficult to simply fix in an exam context. So I would just be aware that you could do something beforehand. And just on that, maybe a final thought on the exam. I think one thing that people do in exam prep that I'd probably challenge is that they see it primarily as a memory exercise rather than as an understanding, an expression of understanding. So when I'm looking at exam scripts, I'm really interested in the understanding that has been achieved. What's the level of understanding that's been achieved? That's the thing I want to find out about. And in terms of the memory test, it's usually not meant, I mean, memory might be a component of it depending on the details of the exam, but usually that's secondary to having the clarity of understanding on the issues that are being asked about. And so I would say in your preparation, you should practice doing mini answers. So what I'd do, if I've got the 2-hour exam coming up, that's the scenario we talked about, 40 minutes each, why not make it simple? Why not see what you can write, create 3 questions, look through the sorts of topics that might be coming up, could be using past papers, could create it yourself, looking at topics that might be covered, and create mini questions and just see what you can write in 10 minutes or even 20 minutes for one question and get a sense of that. And what you're doing there is you're doing many things. One, you're learning about the management of time in an exam, but the other thing that you're doing is you're actually learning to generate knowledge. You're learning to structure stuff that you're remembering and recalling into your answer. And I think that that is incredibly helpful. And especially if you have got concerns about how you might write in an exam, try and do a lot of writing before the exam.
Amazing. We had a couple pre-submitted questions. So there's one that's kind of interesting because it kind of links back into the aspect of critical writing and thinking. So this person has asked, how do you make sure that you're actually writing critically instead of just describing both sides?
Very good. Yeah, I think that's excellent. So I think it's partly to do with the narrative through which the content is carried. So it's interesting, isn't it? The critical dimension can often be represented in quite a few words. I showed you earlier just now how some of this operates, and we, looking at some essay examples, and we also saw there how with interconnectedness as well, just a few words can make a really big difference as well. So how do you make sure that you're not just describing? Sometimes this is hard. So for example, say you're writing on, I don't know, social identity theory, for example, and you're evaluating research into social identity and the idea that one's salient identity shapes group behavior. What you might want to do there, you are going to have to mobilize and describe a lot of social identity work, but you're going to want to bring in rival perspectives. Now, the thing that makes the rival perspectives seem like they're critical or be critical is how you introduce the one perspective to the other. So what you have to do is think, this is the big question, what are the implications? If you can answer that question, then you're talking about critical evaluation. One way of thinking about critical evaluation is that it's really like showing your thinking. Maybe the term critical evaluation actually takes us away from it a little bit. Being critically evaluative is to show how you are thinking about the implications of one piece of work, one perspective for another. And that's really what it's doing. And so it's finding the language to show our thinking about how the ideas relate, about the implications of one idea for another. But I would take it further. I'd say, so one thing is, if I use the social identity theory example, if I draw on relative deprivation theory, I can talk about how that, or how realistic conflict theory, Sharif's work, might contrast with Tajfil's minimal group experiment, social identity theory, very formation of it. I could kind of not just mention, Tajfil did this, oh, by the way, but Sharif did something different. I can think, how is it that Sharif is different? Maybe one way of thinking about this is imagine that they kind of all came round, I don't know, for some sort of dinner or something, it kind of slightly fiendish thought, given that many of them might be ghosts. But we can put that to one side. I think they would probably talk to each other at some level, wouldn't they? And what would they say if they were not just arguing or ignoring one another? What would they say to each other about their ideas? Imagine them having a slightly formal, slightly awkward conversation. Wouldn't, Tajfil critique some of the other ideas? Would he want to, would he be criticized by relative deprivation theory, for example, for ignoring perceived inequality as a kind of motive force for group behavior? So would he be criticized by, discursive work that takes things in a different direction and looks at the importance of language and understands group behavior from a very different perspective like that? How would he argue with Sharif, who, had done all this important summer camp study just before he was developing his minimal group experiments? And what would Sharif counter-argue about the importance of the context in which group behavior takes place? And the more you reflect on what would their point of argument be and how can I bring out that point of argument in my writing, I think the better you'll be doing. So why not, just as kind of fun exercise, try and get the people in the same room, work out what they would say to one another, and try and get what the implications, how would they bump up against each other? What would they agree on? What would they disagree on? I'm going to stay with this example for a sec. might Sharif say, well, Tajful or Henri, if I can call you that, all well and good, your minimal group experiment, but isn't there a snag? Doesn't the conditions under which groups meet, doesn't that mean anything to you? And maybe Tajful would say, well, Muzaffer, if I can call you that, all well and good, but I've got a model that can be applied without worrying about context, because I found even in a meaningless group, I found that people use their group identity, and on the basis of that, they behave differently towards in-group members and out-group members. Isn't it wonderful that I can have my ideas airdropped into any intergroup encounter? And then, you know, from a relative deprivation theory, you could kind of get into other issues about maybe we need the kind of economic, political, cultural history of the groups and the sense of deprivation and injustice that groups carry with them to better understand what's going on. So what I think is this: if we're drafting an essay, the first thing that you might do is effectively have a list. You might wind up saying, okay, I'm going to stay with the Tajful thing just to keep it coherent. Tajful argued blah, 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 blah. Sharif argued blah, 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 etc. Runciman argued blah, 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 blah. All very good. But then what you want to do is to come back and edit. And I think at the editing stage, you really want to bring in where they would bump up against each other. What are they agreeing and disagreeing on? And at the same time as you might be doing interconnection, you're probably going to be doing critical evaluation. Whilst Tajful argued for a sense of in-group and out-group and a salient group identity shaping our group behavior, you know, Sharif said it depends on the setting in which the groups encounter each other and whether that's cooperative or competitive. And so you're drawing out, and then you could maybe draw out the evidence. And I tend to think that you've got, for the sake of argument, you could think of, you might have more methodologically focused critique, like what sorts of experiments have been used and so on. And you might have more theoretical critique. And I get a lot of students who ask me, you know, should, sorry, it sounds like I'm getting emotional. It's not emotional, it is slightly sore throat. It may be coupled with emotion. But a lot of students ask me about, you know, should I kind of make a point, present the evidence and then evaluate? And I think this comes from certain point, evidence, example, evaluate, and that sort of thing. And I think that's fair enough. And my argument would be, so I'm giving a long argument about this, but I hope it's useful. My argument would be that if you're doing methodological criticism, you could actually have that even when you're doing what otherwise appears to be the descriptive bit. So if I'm writing an essay about, I don't know, pro-social behavior or whatever, is spontaneous pro-social behavior shaped by situational factors or whatever, I could maybe pool all the evidence together and then think about the different types of empirical evidence that have been gathered. And I could kind of show an awareness of how these different types of evidence relate to each other. I could be developing a critique of the methodology, even while I'm doing something that in another way could be quite descriptive. I probably haven't made that point very clear, but what I'm saying is when we're arguing between perspectives, we might first of all put it on the page and then make sure that we bring out how these are different and what the implications of these different ideas are for each other. But even within any one perspective, there's not total coherence. And if we can bring out some of the differences, including stuff like the methodological differences within those different perspectives, as well as between them, then we really are cooking. And I think that'll be a phenomenal piece of work to read.
There seems to be a follow-up question to that, actually.
Sure.
So this is, how can you be critically evaluative when all the research points in the same direction, i.e. everyone agrees or all the evidence is in agreement and there's very little difference?
Okay, so here I would say it kind of depends on what the assignment title is here. So it might well be the case that you're here, you want to find what the learning objectives are for this assignment in that case. So is it about a sense of contemporary applications? Is that what the meaning is? So I would here interrogate the assignment guidance that you've got and try and find out is the expectation in the way in which the assignment has been set that there really is a consensus around this point. If that's the case, and there really is, then find out what it is, hopefully from the guidance or from the tutors responsible or whatever, find out what it is that is being sought. It might be a sophistication of understanding. It might be engagement with the different types of evidence that have supported this claim and how they come together and which evidence is stronger. So there's still a slightly critical element there. If we're looking at for example, in some neuro stuff, there's different types, case study evidence, experimental evidence, fMRI scanner evidence. There still is usually the possibility for critical thinking around different types of evidence, even when it's all pointing in the same direction. Some evidence is more compelling than others, even if it's leaning in the same direction. But I would really be careful before assuming that to be the case. I just double check that that's how the assignment is actually set up, that there is an expectation that you won't be evaluating different perspectives, but rather you will be showing a clarity of understanding of the complexity of the field, an awareness of the different sorts of evidence that are pointing in this same direction. So there's still that something that I'm seeing as critical, even though it might not be a primary motive in the way that very different perspectives are.
Brilliant. I think those are the only questions.
Fantastic.
We move on, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So critical evaluation, very timely and very much something that people wanted to look at. So let's have a good look at this. What it's not and what it is. So good critical evaluation does not just airdrop our opinions and doesn't simply list what others say. Both of these seem to be sidestepping thinking, I think, a little bit. I mean, I don't want to be too harsh on it, but I think there is something in this, actually. So often you do see an attempt at critical evaluation that is either, well, in my opinion, ... When you get that, I'd just say, think about in real world applications when someone says, well, that's my opinion anyway. What happens then? You just think of a situation when someone, maybe they'll, it might be over the festive season, you encounter someone, you have a disagreement on maybe someone you only see once a year or something. You might have a different viewpoint on something. If they were to suddenly say, well, look, that's my opinion. What do you think that does? Does that close down argument or open it up? I think it closes it down. I mean, we could have had a poll on that, but it might have been a bit weird. I'm going to give you the answer. I think that closes it down a little bit, doesn't it? It's like, okay, all right. I'm not going to stray into criticizing your beliefs and opinions, whatever. So I think that's why it's dangerous in an essay, really, to just airdrop in opinions and things. So I think not just listing, what it should do is this. Good critical evaluation involves thinking about work referred to in the light of other perspectives, okay, which might agree, disagree, or reframe the whole issue. So it's bringing different perspectives into contact with one another. Okay, let's have a look at some examples. Latané and Darley's emphasis on the potency of the situation. So we were talking about this a second ago, weren't we? Or I was. Latané and Darley's emphasis on the potency of the situation for determining behavior has been challenged by work that has argued that stable personality traits are far more likely to determine behavior than situational circumstances. Okay, so just you can see in that phrase, there was a question just earlier about, the kind of words that might convey how we might avoid just listening, has been challenged by, it's almost shouting to the reader. Look, there's some evaluation, in case you've nodded off to sleep, there is some evaluation going on here. And I think that's really important. Let's just stay with this thought a little bit longer. Oh, okay, yeah, sorry. I missed the essay title for that. Outline and evaluate Latané and Darley's concept of the bystander effect. And that's where that fits into. It's been challenged by. So sometimes it's just, again, thinking of these characters as being in a room together, I think is quite a handy way of going about it. Imagine that they're bumping up against each other. What are they saying? What are the implications of one's work for another? And there's point of agreement and disagreement, and it's bringing that out with phrases like this. I think this does bring us on actually neatly to conclusions. So there's some conclusions are better than others, I think. And I think a lot of the time, let's be honest, I mentioned about this, how many words have you written academically and all the rest of it. I think we've got to be honest that if you've written lots of words, conclusions are easier to write, but even so, they are hard. I found that the chapter in the book that we're talking about today, Brilliant Essays, I found that the chapter on conclusions took ages. Now, there's one type of conclusion in the book. There's lots of examples of all of the examples, bad writing as well, are from me. I didn't want to hold anyone else's work up to, ridicule or anything like that. I am very fluent, I've discovered, in writing bad essays. I can knock them out like that, which is a bit of a shame, really, because it's a skill that is rarely called upon. So when I was doing the chapter on conclusions, half of them were absolute doddle to write, like that. The other half, oh my gosh, I was sweated over that. And it gave me an insight, actually. I thought, wow, I've underestimated how hard it is to write a conclusion. It's easier to do the wrong things. It's easy to, I put not listing. It's actually easy to just list in this essay. Don't know if you notice, but this is what I covered. I'll just let you know again in case you missed it. That's the sort of conclusion that's very easy to write. That's a listing one. If you can, try and avoid that. That's a very popular, depending on marking and cohort and topic and everything. Sometimes that's almost modal. Sometimes. This is very, very popular as well. Further research is needed. Well, who would have thought? Further research is needed. That I'm not saying that's wrong, but in its vagueness and generality, that can go at the end of every bit of everything that's needed, that's been written, basically, can't it? And I think that might be one that we're best to kind of leave on one side as well. A conceptual conclusion and a scholarly conclusion. Now, that's what we want to do. We want to group things together, group together arguments at a conceptual level. So we might think about the broad approach that we're talking about. What sort of an argument is this? What does this suggest about pro-social behavior? What does it suggest about how we've defined aggression? What does this suggest about how we've understood the interaction between personality and situation? It's grouping the different little approaches that you touched on in the essay. What's the essence or the core? So this is conceptual thinking. It's hard and it takes ages to get there. And scholarly, can you convey a scholarly mind at work? And I think this is quite important as well. And so I would say that it reminds me, actually, a long time ago, there was an external examiner at the university where I work, and his name was Tony Gale, and he was a former president of the British Psychological Society. And he used to have this brilliant way of thinking about a lot of things, but he said that in really good writing, what he wants to see is a scholarly mind at work. And that stayed with me many, many years later, that really, when you're reading a great conclusion, what you're seeing is this scholarly mind at work. That's what we want. And that's, in a way, it's not so much giving the right conclusion, and it's not just avoiding the so-called wrong conclusions, but it's bringing that precision and conceptualization. Hard to do both of those, but that really conveys this scholarly mind at work. So I would very much advise going for that. So let's have a little look to get a clearer sense of this. What they shouldn't look like. Let's imagine that this is your essay title. To what extent does social identity theory account for why people engage in riots? Okay, so this is, we've got two here that I'm going to read out. So we're going to call this conclusion 1. In conclusion, this essay has shown that people riot for lots of different reasons. Le Bon's group mind approach suggested that when isolated, a person may be a very cultivated individual, but in a crowd, he or she becomes a creature acting by instinct. Zimbardo conducted experiments showing that when people are made anonymous, they become de-individuated, and that this gives rise to the release of destructive impulses and aggression. So just kind of take a moment to absorb that if you could. And now I'm going to move on to conclusion 2. Conclusion 2. Social identity theory, I'll put it to be brief. Social identity theory has challenged previous accounts of social unrest, including ... drawing on data from real-world riots to emphasize the role of group or social identity and to argue that such behavior may be purposive rather than merely impulsive. Methodological challenges to social identity theory have ... And this may inevitably lead to findings that emphasize rationale over impulsivity, whilst theoretical challenges have argued ... that the approach has under-theorized the link between identity and the broader social and ideological context. Now, there's a lot of dots in there. I just want to be clear that is done to fit it on the page rather than, you know, so imagine that they are filled in. So we've got 2 conclusions to think about. They are conclusion 1. In conclusion, this essay is shown ... Le Bon's group mind, Zimbardo experiment showing, and we've got the conclusion 2, social identity theories challenge previous accounts, methodological challenges, theoretical challenges have argued. I wonder which you think is stronger out of these 2.
People having to think about this a bit more, I think.
Mm.
Takes a bit more thought.
Yeah, I think this could be a challenging one, actually.
But we've got some votes in. We'll just give everyone a little bit more time.
Yeah.
There is one that's showing more popular, but I'm not going to say what it is.
yeah. I always make the mistake of narrating the results as they come in, and then I don't know. I think it seems to influence them.
Okay, last chance to put your vote in. And as I said, don't worry, no one can see how you vote, so it just adds the general sort of percentages of the votes. We're not going to point and laugh, don't worry.
Absolutely.
Okay, I will just end the poll and share the results then. Okay, there we go. So everyone should be able to see the results on their screen now.
Thank you very much. So that's very helpful. So I'm thinking we are getting quite a winner there. Conclusion 2 seems to have nipped ahead. Please do not feel at all bad if you went for conclusion 1. Sometimes when I look at these, I see my editing. If you see the full, these are in the book. I use a lot of examples like that in the book. But you'll see the full conclusion, and it's very, very clear then. I think with my editing, as I was reading it, I thought, oh my goodness, that looks really choppy. So I think if you voted conclusion 1, quite understand. I think you picked up on the choppiness of my editing, which I apologize for. But I think we do have a sense that conclusion 2 probably is the stronger of the 2. And I think if we can just think about what's going on with conclusion 2, I think it's these highlighted sections that are really interesting, rather than just going into the what previous, listing previous research. Le Bon did this, Zimbardo did that, which is clearly written. It's gone into this idea of critique. So social identity theory has challenged previous accounts, but then there's these challenges to social identity theory that take the form of methodological and theoretical challenges. That's a sort of conceptualizing or grouping together, isn't it? It's both looking at the challenge or the critique that social identity theory offers and how it itself has been challenged and critiqued. So thank you very much for taking part in that. Much appreciated. I did want to touch, I realized that I think we're still okay for time. I want to touch on exams because I think that can be an issue. And I'm not going to spend absolutely ages on this. And I think I also want to talk about procrastination. I don't know if I'll just maybe in the chat, if you want me to deal with procrastination, if you feel that's an issue, then I will make sure that I spend an adequate amount of time on that as well. So I think with exams, I think exam anxiety And I'm going to say the same thing about procrastination, actually. I think it kind of comes from a good place, actually. So if we see anxiety for our exams, it's sort of coming from a position of wanting to do well. And so I think when we want to, really achieve on exams and we're getting anxious, let's not see anxiety as the fiend or the sort of villain of the piece there. I think that's really not very helpful, because then we kind of get anxious about being anxious. I think we get into some sort of spiral. So I think I would encourage a sort of honesty about our exam anxiety. I'd say that's nearly always the case, that people have some sort of anxiety about exams. And that a certain amount of anxiety really helps. So I've invigilated quite a lot of exams over the years. And my feeling is that, in a way, in those exam rooms, what I see is that the energy in the room is amazing. And what I've tended to think is, wow, I kind of wish you could bottle the energy. I look at people, they're concentrated, they're occasionally stopping, but there's such an activity that's going on. It's incredible. The way the activity, the energy is harnessed and concentrated and it flows out. I think that's wonderful. And so without any anxiety, that might not be possible. Similarly, I would say that without any sense of anxiety around the exam, maybe the revision wouldn't have taken place. So I think let's be honest about what we're feeling. Let's see what contributes to it. But I would encourage, in the preparation, don't see it as a memory test. Whatever sort of exam you've got, I wouldn't see it, unless you've been told this is like a memory test. I wouldn't primarily approach it as that. I'd see it really as an understanding and an argument. And if you approach it like that, I think you'll be really well set for the exam. Comes to what I was saying earlier, I think you want to prepare for the exam by setting yourself, or maybe you're working with others, setting each other questions of the nature that might come up, so that you practice producing before you go into the exam room. Do you see what I mean? That actually helps you remember things at a deep level as well. So just tick that box. But otherwise, what you're in danger of doing is making more stress for yourself beyond the optimal level of stress in the exam room, because you will, in that exam room, have to manage both the process of bringing the material to your mind and organizing it in a coherent way. Whereas if you set yourself or each other's questions similar to what might come up in the exam, or maybe what did in the past, you will have practiced organizing the material in your answer. Do you know what I mean? So what you're doing is closing the gap between revision and exam. And I think that's really quite important. So make your preparation a little bit more like the examination. Make what you're doing as you prepare for the exam not so different to being in the examination scenario. And that's the deep engagement with the material. And in the exam, a little bit of writing tends to lead to more memory, more unfolding. Acknowledge that stress can be a friend. Practice that deep engagement I keep going on about. And as I say, once you start writing, more will flow. And I've seen amazing stuff done in exams. And that does that. I don't know whether people wanted procrastination, but okay, yeah, I thought I did notice comments kind of flicking up, and I couldn't go into the comments. So I had to, the chat, I had to kind of just have a guess as to what was coming up there. So my psychic powers were telling me that procrastination is important. Okay. So try some engagement as soon as you can. That's my thought. But I'm going to scroll back a little bit here and ignore what's on the slide. So with the exam, I mentioned in that environment, people are not procrastinating usually. Sometimes people stop. You can get blocked in exams, but people are amazing at writing a lot in the exam in a very unblocked way. And I think, what can we learn from that? I think there's a few things we can learn. I think in an exam environment, there are fewer distractors, for one. And I think it is difficult, more difficult than ever before. It's hard to live without our phones. We're all within arm's reach, I think, of a phone. I'd actually thought I'd left mine in another room, and I was starting to get a slight panic about it, but I see I've got it. So you see, there's a sort of addictive quality to it, and there's an amazing distractive quality to it. At the moment, I keep getting videos about airplane crashes, which is lovely, and random things, and animals that do remarkable, animals involved in acts of kindness or something, I don't know. So there's a lot of weird stuff that I seem to quite keep getting. I'm not sure what you get, but it's built, almost engineered to be a distractor, to actually get us. It's designed to do two things, okay? One, to keep it with us all the while. So I don't know if you have how many steps you counted. I've only done like 1,000 or something today, the minimal. So I'll probably get told off later on. But that is so that I keep it in my pocket all the while. And all of the content really is to deliver me to ads. So, and to keep me addicted to the software and so on. So the thing is, these organizations really don't care. Apple, Huawei, and all the rest of them, Samsung, etc. They really don't mind too much about you and your degree, but in a way, that's very important for you. And so we don't want to let this and the different interests that these companies have kind of dominate our lives. So I would just say, from a position of care rather than censure, let's try and not let the distraction be too oppressive for us. Let's try and make our involvement with the work that we've got more fun. I mentioned about, imagine that Tajful and Sharif and whatever meet each other at a party and whatever. Do fun stuff like that. If you're creative, you might like that sort of wacky idea. Do things that make it manageable. You might have a different turn of mind where what you really want is to keep it all organized. You might want to do things with post-it notes or whatnot. And yeah, sure, do whatever makes it more enjoyable. Some people are very artistic. I've had students who are very artistic who stick things, I think they are post-it notes, all over their walls with different colors and patterns and shapes. All of that is great. And sometimes almost doing anything is better than doing absolutely loads. I think those of us who have experienced procrastination, and I'm speaking as a sufferer rather than someone who's telling you what to do and never has experienced it. I think I'll be honest, I think you get good advice from both people who are so organized that they've never, they fake it. If they say, oh yeah, I procrastinated once, I waited 5 minutes before starting that work and I could have done, yeah, okay, thank you. I think you can get good advice from those super organized people as well, and from sufferers who have reflected on their suffering. And I'm kind of more the latter, to be honest. So I do know what procrastination feels like. And I think I know the importance of dealing with the emotional dimensions of it as well. So procrastination does not come from a place for most people of not caring. I've encountered hundreds of people who procrastinate, students, colleagues, everyone. It does not come from a position of lack of care, but almost too much care. And I think that's really important to grasp, that people procrastinate not because they are not bothered or not concerned. And so I'm not really feeling that the messages do it now or whatever, just do it or whatever. It sounds like some sort of shoe advert or something. I don't think that those sort of messages necessarily are going to really be the medicine that cures your procrastination. I think instead what you really want is something that's more supportive. I think a lot of people who procrastinate set themselves up to fail by creating impossible amounts of work. I've got this weekend, I'm going to knock out those 2 essays. So that's probably very unlikely to happen. But what that means is that on Monday, you've got the guilt of 2 days that you wasted scrolling through stuff or whatever it might be, and you didn't get around to those essays, or you got them started and you've only got a few words on the page or whatever. And I think that's really a shame when that's the case. And I think one thing we have to deal with this from 2 directions. One is, don't set yourself up big tasks, set yourself up easy to start tasks, non-threatening soft entry points for the work that you've got ahead, stuff that you wouldn't put off, that it's only, you're committing yourself to 15 minutes work on something, okay? In this 15 minutes, I'm going to read the title through 3 times and write for 10 minutes on just what I know now about it. Why not do that? You know, it doesn't have to be that, oh, I'm going to write the intro and the main body in the morning, then finish the main body, write the conclusion, references in the afternoon. You know, that almost certainly won't happen. So why not set yourself up something that is quite simple? And if you have a bit of work that you can connect to on a regular basis, that's so much easier than coming into it having to do everything at the very last minute. I think that's really very much more stressful. So try and make it fun. Don't set yourself up to fail. And I think this is the key thing that I want to, I really want to communicate to you. And that is that I think you've got to forgive yourself when it goes wrong. So we've probably all done this Sergeant Major thing with ourselves. And I think we've got to allow ourselves this sense of forgiveness, that it's not about doing something amazingly ambitious and pulling it off. It's about being able to pick it up again, because if we don't forgive ourselves when we go wrong, the snag is we avoid the painful confrontation of that. And so what we do is we procrastinate yet further still. And I think that's where it becomes more problematic. So we've got to make it easy for ourselves to pick it up and to carry on again. So don't be judgmental. Be as encouraging to yourself as you would to others who are suffering with procrastination. Okay, so I'm coming towards the end. I've got a final moment for Q&As, I think, at this point. So I'm just going to switch the light on where I am. I do apologize. I just feel the light is a little bit lower here at the moment. Just one sec. Thank you very much. Okay, so I don't know if we've got anything in terms of questions that might be coming through.
Well, we had a question a little earlier about finding. If you just give me a second, it's more about how to find materials and research papers easily. If you had any tips or any websites, or you mentioned Google Scholar earlier, but if you had any other specific areas.
I think what I'd do is I'd start a search using the any of the recommended reading, but also in the relevant talk session. That might have been a seminar or a lecture or something. I'd kind of go to that relevant talk session and I'd have a little look at what's going on there. And I'd say that maybe that, using that as a source to search for. And I mentioned that, you know, in Web of Science, Google Scholar, etc., you could see where these things are cited. So if there was a key debate or a key set of ideas that were covered maybe in the talk session that you had, that would be a really good starting point. So recommended reading, of course, is a key starting point. Also, whatever the session might have been, I would have a little look at that and see what's been covered there. Can I use those search terms in whatever databases I might be using? You know, psych articles, often very good curated APA psychology journal articles and so on, can be a very, very good starting point. PsycInfo, Web of Science, and I've mentioned Google Scholar previously. But I think it's the thing is how you do the search. And what I'd also do is I get the critical evaluation stuff in there as well. In your search, you don't just want names and lots of, you know, lots of information about whatever it might be, the key name or key theory. You often want critique and evaluation of. And if you put those into your search terms, you tend to get quite a good result, I think.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul. We don't have any more questions in the chat at the moment. I was taking a look and it seems like you've answered most of the pre-submitted questions before they've been asked as well. So you've kind of nailed it. I don't know if anyone else has any more questions, so I'll just keep an eye on the chat. But if not, yeah, it looks like most people are just very, very happy and grateful for all the information that you provide.
Well, I was thinking, you know, Siddharth and Jenny, I was thinking, if this was a taught session, I would probably do something like dress up as Santa and get my celebrations chocolates out and give them, and I can't do that. So I wrote a song instead. So you're welcome to edit this out if you don't want it. And you're welcome to leave if you don't want it. I don't know, is this a regular way of, I don't know whether this often happens in these sessions or not. I've just got to check. Okay, so this is a song really, because procrastination came up, I thought, well, yeah, maybe I should do this after all. I wasn't sure. So bear with me for a second. I had to write an essay. Ooh. And I'm not gonna lie, just reading the title, well, it made me want to cry. I spent the day just scrolling, and the essay went unwrote. And all I did was find out about a psychiatric code. Maybe this is why we need to try another way. Just making a start of this could totally change the day. Listen to the voice that says, I believe in you, hope you do too. I tried to get it written with my mini write-a-thon. 8 solid hours of writing should get the whole thing done. Several hours later, with 12 words on the page, I struggled with self-loathing and suppressed a quiet rage. Maybe this is why we should try another way. Just making a start on this could totally change the day. Listen to the voice that says that I believe in you, hope you do too. Maybe this is why we need to try another way. Just making a start on this could totally change the day. Listen to the voice that says, I believe in you, hope you do too. Okay. Thank you very much. It's great to see you all. The real thing that I want to communicate, whether it's through flaky guitar playing or whatever, is that I just want you to reach your full potential. And if we can help you achieve that, then that's wonderful.
Oh, that was amazing. Thank you. So I don't think we've ever ended an event like that. So it's a great way to end this academic year's set of events as well. Thank you so much, Paul. And I think
thank you very much.
As well, everyone is very appreciative, not just of all the tips, but of the amazing song at the end. Yeah, I think we've all felt that at one point or another. So it was fantastic. I think it hit us all very personally.
Brilliant.
But again, thank you on behalf of the Boost Your Skills team, everyone that's attended today. Thank you to everyone that took the time to attend.
Yeah, definitely.
All for all your time today, for all the amazing information. And in case anyone did miss it at the start, we will be sending out an email with links to the video and the slides afterwards. Just keep an eye out for that. But again, thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day.
Yeah,
it was brilliant to see you all today. And
likewise, thank you.